The smell of barbecue smoke filled the air as I stood on the perfectly manicured lawn of the Parker family home in Lake Oswego. Patricia Parker was holding court near the outdoor kitchen, her voice carrying across the yard like a bullhorn. She didn't know I could hear her, but every word hit me like a physical blow. "That girl was the worst thing that ever happened to my son," she declared to the circle of family friends gathered around her. "Ryan was doing so well before she came along. He had direction, ambition. Then she waltzed in with her little marketing job and her big ideas, and look what happened. He's a mess now, completely lost." I gripped my car keys so tightly they left marks on my palm. I had come here to return some of Ryan's things that I'd found in my apartment, not to be publicly humiliated by his mother. But there she was, painting me as some kind of villain in front of people who had watched me love her son for 3 years. "She's poison," Patricia continued, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass. "Some women just drag men down, you know. They pretend to care, but really they're just users. Thank goodness Ryan finally saw her for what she really was and ended things. I could have walked away. I should have walked away. But something inside me snapped. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila folder I always carried with me now, the one filled with bank statements, payment confirmations, and receipts that told a very different story than the one Patricia was telling. I walked straight up to her circle of admirers and cleared my throat. Every face turned toward me, some embarrassed, others curious. Patricia's face went white, then red. "Patricia," I said calmly, "I think there's something you should know about why Ryan is really struggling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I was wrong. Real heartbreak isn't just losing the person you love. It's discovering that the family you tried so hard to win over has spent months rewriting history to make you the villain in a story where you were actually the hero. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a marketing coordinator for a digital agency in downtown Portland. It's not glamorous work, but I'm good at it. I understand how to tell stories, how to make people care about brands they've never heard of. What I never learned was how to tell my own story, how to defend myself when the narrative was being written without me. Ryan and I met 3 years ago at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. I was working on a campaign for a local restaurant, laptop open, surrounded by color samples and font choices. He was at the next table, struggling with what looked like financial paperwork, running his hands through his dark hair in frustration. When he accidentally knocked over his coffee and it splashed onto my work, I expected to be annoyed. Instead, I found myself laughing. "I'm so sorry," he said, grabbing napkins and looking genuinely mortified. "I'll pay for reprinting whatever I just ruined." "It's fine," I told him, saving my files and closing the laptop. Most of it was digital anyway. That's how it started. A spilled coffee, an apology, and a conversation that stretched on for 2 hours. Ryan was charming in a quiet way, the kind of person who listened more than he talked and remembered small details about things you'd mentioned weeks before. He worked in sales for a tech company, he told me, though he seemed uncertain about it, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. What I didn't know then was that Ryan had a secret that was slowly destroying his life. What I definitely didn't know was that his mother, Patricia, had already decided I wasn't good enough for her son before she'd even met me. Our first family dinner at the Parker house should have been a warning. Patricia answered the door in a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, took one look at my Target dress and thrift store cardigan, and smiled the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "So you're Sarah," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Ryan's told us so much about you." The emphasis on so much made it clear that whatever Ryan had shared, it hadn't impressed her. She led me through a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine, all neutral colors and expensive art, into a dining room where Ryan's father, David, was already seated. He was kinder than his wife, asking genuine questions about my work and seeming interested in my answers. But Patricia dominated the conversation, steering it constantly toward topics that highlighted our differences. "Ryan tells us you rent an apartment in the Pearl District," she said, cutting her salmon into precise pieces. "Such an interesting choice. We always told Ryan that buying property was the smart financial move, but I suppose not everyone sees it that way." "I'm saving for a down payment," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "The market is pretty competitive right now." "Oh, of course," Patricia nodded sympathetically. "It must be difficult on a marketing salary. Such a crowded field, isn't it? So many people trying to make it work." Ryan squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't defend me. That became a pattern. Patricia would make her little comments, her subtle digs, and Ryan would sit there silently, caught between his mother and his girlfriend, choosing neither. After dinner, as we walked to my car, I asked him about it. "Does your mom always interview your girlfriends like that?" "She's just protective," Ryan said, not meeting my eyes. "She'll warm up to you. She just needs time." But time didn't help. If anything, Patricia's disapproval grew stronger as our relationship deepened. She had a way of making me feel small without saying anything directly offensive. She'd compliment my dress while mentioning how much she loved Ryan's ex-girlfriend's style. She'd ask about my family while talking about how wonderful it was that Ryan came from such a stable background. She made me understand that in her eyes, I would never be enough for her son. What made it worse was that Ryan seemed to be pulling away too. The confident, charming man I'd fallen in love with was becoming anxious and distracted. He'd check his phone constantly, disappear for mysterious errands, and deflect whenever I tried to ask what was wrong. He started picking fights about small things like how much I spent on groceries or whether I really needed to buy new clothes for work. "Money's just tight right now," he'd say when I questioned his stress. "Work's been slow." But his lifestyle didn't match his claims about money being tight. He still went out with his college friends every weekend, still bought expensive gadgets and clothes. When I offered to pay for dinners or suggest cheaper date options, he'd get defensive. "I can take care of my girlfriend," he'd snap. "I don't need you to manage my finances." The first time I found the credit card statements, I wasn't snooping. Ryan had asked me to grab his laptop charger from his bedroom, and when I moved a stack of mail on his dresser, several envelopes fell to the floor. I picked them up without looking, but one had already torn open, and I couldn't help seeing the number at the bottom of the page. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. $15,000 in credit card debt on just one card. My stomach dropped. $15,000 was more than I made in 6 months. I stared at that number, trying to make sense of it. Ryan made good money in tech sales. He lived in a nice apartment, but it wasn't extravagant. Where could $15,000 have gone? I put the statements back and didn't say anything. It wasn't my business, I told myself. We weren't married. We weren't even living together. If Ryan had debt, that was his situation to handle. But the signs were everywhere once I started looking. The way he'd disappear on Saturday afternoons, claiming he was visiting his parents but coming back stressed and tired. The mysterious phone calls he'd take in another room. The anxiety that seemed to follow him everywhere like a shadow. 3 months later, I found out the truth in the worst possible way. I was supposed to meet Ryan at his apartment for dinner, but when I arrived, the door was slightly open and I could hear voices inside. Not wanting to interrupt if he was on a work call, I waited in the hallway. That's when I heard a man's voice I didn't recognize, low and threatening. "You've got until Friday, Ryan. No more extensions, no more excuses. You understand what happens if you don't come through?" "I understand." Ryan's voice was shaking. "I'll have it, I promise." "You promised last month too. My boss is getting impatient. These aren't the kind of people you want to disappoint." The door opened and a man in an expensive suit walked out, not even glancing at me as he headed for the elevator. I waited until I heard it close before knocking on Ryan's door. When he opened it, his face was pale and there was sweat on his forehead despite the cool evening. "Sarah," he said, forcing a smile, "I didn't hear you come up." "Ryan, who was that man?" "What man?" But his eyes darted away from mine. "The one who just left. The one talking about Friday and promises and disappointment." Ryan's shoulders sagged. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me the truth. Instead, he stepped aside to let me in and said, "It was nothing, just a work thing." But it wasn't nothing. Over the next few weeks, the truth came out in pieces. Ryan had a gambling problem that started in college and had spiraled completely out of control. Online poker, sports betting, casino trips that turned into weekend-long binges. He'd maxed out his credit cards, taken personal loans, and finally, borrowed money from people who didn't accept late payments. "How much?" I asked when he finally broke down and told me everything. "Total? About $47,000. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. $47,000. It was more money than I'd ever seen at once, more than most people my age had in savings. "Some of it is to actual loan companies," Ryan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But about $20,000 is to people who don't work through banks." "You mean loan sharks?" He nodded, unable to look at me. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Any rational person would have seen this for what it was, a problem too big for a 27-year-old marketing coordinator to solve. But I wasn't rational. I was in love with a man who was drowning, and I couldn't stand by and watch him go under. That night, I went home and looked at my savings account. I had $18,000, money I'd been carefully putting away, for a house down payment since I graduated college. It represented years of careful budgeting, skipped vacations, and secondhand clothes. But if it could save Ryan, if it could give him a chance to get clean and start over, maybe it would be worth it. I didn't tell him about my decision right away. Instead, I did research. I learned about gambling addiction, about treatment options, about the cycle of debt and desperation that trapped people like Ryan. I called his bank and learned about debt consolidation loans. I researched the kind of people he owed money to and realized just how dangerous his situation had become. The men who had loaned Ryan money weren't going to wait for him to get his life together. They wanted their payment now. And if they didn't get it, Ryan could end up hospitalized or worse. So I made a choice that changed everything. I took my down payment money and I started paying Ryan's debts. Not all at once, and not in a way that would make him feel like a charity case. I convinced him to let me help him organize his finances, and then I quietly began transferring money to his accounts. When he got notices about minimum payments due, I'd suggest he let me help him budget, and then I'd loan him whatever he needed to stay current. The dangerous debts, the ones to the men in expensive suits who made threats, those I paid directly. I found their contact information in Ryan's phone and arranged meetings in public places. I handed over cash in coffee shops and parking garages, telling them that Ryan was getting his act together, and this was a gesture of good faith. "Smart girlfriend," one of them told me as I handed him an envelope with $3,000. Most girls would have run by now. Ryan never knew. He thought he was finally getting lucky, finally catching breaks. His credit card companies were mysteriously willing to work with him on payment plans. The loan shark stopped calling. The anxiety that had been eating him alive slowly began to fade. For a while, it worked. Ryan got into counseling for his gambling addiction. He seemed happier, more like the man I'd fallen in love with. We started talking about the future again, about moving in together, about the trips we wanted to take. But Patricia never stopped, hating me. If anything, her disapproval grew stronger as Ryan's life stabilized. She couldn't point to his stress and anxiety anymore, couldn't blame me for his problems. So she found new reasons to dislike me. I was too ambitious, too independent. I worked too much. I didn't cook enough. I was changing Ryan, making him soft. "She's not the right kind of woman for you," I overheard her telling Ryan one Sunday when I was supposedly in the bathroom. "You need someone who will support your goals, not distract you with her own agenda." The end came 6 months ago, and it wasn't because of the money or the gambling or even Patricia's disapproval. It came because Ryan wasn't ready to be saved. He relapsed, not with gambling, but with the lying. I found out he'd been hiding smaller debts, new credit cards he'd opened and maxed out within weeks. The counseling sessions he claimed to be attending, he'd been skipping half of them. The recovery group, he said, was helping so much, he'd never actually joined. "I was going to tell you," he said when I confronted him with the evidence. "I just needed a little more time to figure it out." "Ryan, I've given you time. I've given you money. I've given you 3 years of my life. What I can't give you is the desire to actually change." The breakup wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no thrown objects, no dramatic declarations. It was just exhausting. We both knew it was over. Ryan moved back in with his parents, and I kept paying the debts I'd already committed to because I couldn't stand the thought of him getting hurt because of money I'd promised to people who didn't make idle threats. Patricia was thrilled. She didn't try to hide it. "This is the best thing that could have happened," she told Ryan within earshot of me when I came to collect my things. "Now you can find someone who actually deserves you." That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've watched from a distance as Patricia rewrote our entire relationship. In her version, I was the problem all along. I was the one who held Ryan back, who made him anxious, who kept him from reaching his potential. She conveniently forgot about the stress and fear that had consumed him before I started helping. She forgot about the dangerous men who used to call at all hours. She forgot about everything except her need to paint me as the villain. And Ryan let her. He never corrected her when she blamed me for his problems. He never mentioned the money I'd spent or the risks I'd taken. He just sat quietly while his mother created a narrative that made me responsible for everything that had gone wrong in his life. So when I heard her at that barbecue, telling a group of family friends that I was the worst thing that had ever happened to her son, something inside me broke. I had spent $43,000 of my own money keeping Ryan safe. I had sacrificed my dreams of home ownership, my financial security, and my peace of mind to protect a man who couldn't protect himself. I had paid debts to dangerous people while his mother slept comfortably in her Lake Oswego mansion, never knowing how close her precious son had come to serious harm. And now she was standing in her backyard, drinking expensive wine and telling people that I was poison. I was done being quiet. I was done letting them rewrite history. I was done protecting Ryan's reputation at the expense of my own. It was time to tell the truth. I reached into that manila folder and pulled out the first document, a bank statement from Chase showing a wire transfer of $8,000 to Pacific Credit Solutions, dated 3 months after Ryan and I broke up. Patricia's wine glass froze halfway to her lips as I held it up for everyone to see. "This is what Ryan's gambling addiction really looked like," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. $8,000 I transferred to pay off one of his credit cards so his credit wouldn't be completely destroyed. The circle of family friends had gone completely silent. Patricia's face cycled through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Ryan doesn't have a gambling problem. He's been gambling since college," I interrupted, pulling out another statement. "Online poker, sports betting, casino trips to Spirit Mountain that turned into 3-day binges. By the time I found out, he owed $47,000 to credit card companies, personal loan services, and people who don't send polite reminder notices when you miss payments." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. David Parker had appeared from somewhere behind me, drawn by the commotion. His face was pale as he looked at the papers in my hand. "That's impossible," Patricia finally managed. Ryan tells us everything. He would have said something if he was in trouble. I almost laughed. Almost. Ryan didn't tell you because he was ashamed, because he knew you'd be disappointed, because he was terrified, that the perfect son you'd raised had made mistakes that could get him seriously hurt. I pulled out another document, this one showing a cash withdrawal of $5,000 from my savings account. This went to Marcus Webb, one of the men Ryan borrowed money from when the banks wouldn't give him any more credit. Marcus works for people who break kneecaps when they don't get paid on time. The woman standing next to Patricia, someone I recognized but had never been introduced to, took a step back. David moved closer, his eyes fixed on the papers in my hand like they contained information about a stranger, not his son. "You paid his debts?" David asked quietly. "I paid his debts," I confirmed. "For 2 years, $43,000. Total. My entire savings account, my emergency fund, and half of what I've earned since we broke up. I kept paying even after he dumped me because I couldn't stand the thought of him getting hurt over money he owed to dangerous people." Patricia shook her head vigorously. "This is ridiculous. You're making this up. Ryan would have told us if he was in that kind of trouble." That's when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. I turned around to see Ryan walking up the driveway, probably coming back from whatever errand had taken him away from his own family gathering. He stopped dead when he saw me standing, in the middle of his parents' social circle, bank statements in my hand, every face turned toward our little drama. "Sarah?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to return your things," I said, gesturing toward the small box I'd left by the front door. "But your mother was just explaining to everyone how I was the worst thing that ever happened to you. I thought maybe they should know the whole story." Ryan's eyes moved from my face to the papers in my hand to his mother's horrified expression. I watched the color drain from his face as he realized what was happening. "Please," he said, taking a step toward me. "Don't do this here." "Do what, Ryan? Tell the truth? Tell people that while your mother was complaining about my Target dresses and my rental apartment, I was emptying my savings account to keep you safe." Patricia found her voice again. "Ryan, tell her to stop. Tell everyone she's lying." But Ryan couldn't do that, and we all knew it. Instead, he stood there in his parents' driveway, looking like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. I pulled out another statement, this one showing a payment to Northwest Recovery Services. "This was for the personal loan you took out when you'd maxed out all your credit cards. $12,000 at 18% interest. I paid it off in full so you wouldn't have collectors calling you at work." "Sarah, please." Ryan's voice was strained. "You don't understand how this looks." "I understand exactly how this looks," I replied. "It looks like your girlfriend spent her house down payment money keeping you out of serious trouble while your mother told everyone who would listen that I was dragging you down." I turned back to Patricia, who was gripping her wine glass so tightly I was surprised it hadn't shattered. "You want to know why Ryan seemed stressed and anxious when we were together? It wasn't because I was some terrible influence. It was because he owed money to people who don't accept excuses. It was because he was getting phone calls from men who threatened to hurt him if he didn't pay up. It was because your perfect son had a serious addiction that was destroying his life." "That's enough," David said firmly, but not unkindly. "Sarah, I think maybe we should discuss this privately." "Why privately?" I asked. Patricia didn't have any problem discussing my supposed failures publicly. She didn't seem concerned about privacy when she was telling everyone how I ruined your son's life. I pulled out one more document, this one a receipt from a cash transaction. This was $3,000 I gave to a man named Eddie Torino. He worked for someone Ryan had borrowed money from when he couldn't get credit anywhere else. Eddie told me I was a smart girlfriend for taking care of the debt. He said most girls would have run by now. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then Patricia spoke, her voice shaky but still defiant. "Even if this is true, it doesn't change anything. You should have encouraged him to tell us. You should have made him get help properly instead of just throwing money at the problem." I stared at her, amazed by her ability to twist even this revelation into my fault. I did encourage him to get help. I found the counseling program he attended. I drove him to his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I researched debt consolidation options. But I also made sure he didn't get his legs broken while he was working on recovery. Ryan finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. "Mom, she's telling the truth." Patricia turned to her son with an expression of complete betrayal. "Ryan, how could you not tell us? How could you let her handle this instead of coming to your family?" "Because I was ashamed," Ryan said, looking at the ground. "Because I knew you'd be disappointed. Because I thought I could fix it myself." "By letting your girlfriend sacrifice her future?" David asked. "I didn't ask her to," Ryan said quickly, then looked at me with something that might have been guilt or gratitude or regret. "I told her not to. I said I could handle it." "You couldn't handle it," I said simply. "The debt was growing faster than your salary. The interest rates were killing you. And the people you owed money to weren't going to wait for you to figure out a payment plan." I folded the bank statements and put them back in the manila folder. "I didn't pay your debts because I thought you were helpless. I paid them because I loved you and I couldn't stand watching you destroy yourself. I paid them because I knew your family would help if they understood the situation, but you were too proud to tell them the truth." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd just heard. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller somehow. $43,000? $43,000, I confirmed. "Your savings account?" "My savings account, my emergency fund, and 6 months of extra freelance work to make up the difference." She looked at Ryan, then back at me. "I didn't know." "No," I agreed. "You didn't know. But that didn't stop you from deciding I was bad for your son. That didn't stop you from treating me like I was some kind of gold digger or troublemaker. You looked at my secondhand clothes and my rental apartment and decided I wasn't worthy of Ryan, even though I was literally keeping him safe with my own money." The woman standing next to Patricia, the one I'd never been introduced to, cleared her throat uncomfortably. "I think maybe we should give the family some privacy." "No," I said. "I think the family should know exactly what kind of sacrifice I made for someone who let his mother spend 6 months calling me poison." I pulled out my phone and showed them my savings account balance. "This is what's left of my down payment fund, $837. I'm 28 years old and I have less than $1,000 to my name because I spent everything keeping your son safe." David moved closer to look at my phone screen, his expression grim. "Sarah, we had no idea. If you had known, would you have stopped Patricia from treating me like I was beneath your family? Would you have defended me when she made those comments about my job and my apartment and my background?" David was quiet. We all knew the answer. Patricia finally set down her wine glass with shaky hands. "I was protecting my son." "From what? From someone who loved him enough to sacrifice their own financial security? From someone who researched treatment options and drove him to meetings and made sure he didn't end up in the hospital? I thought you were the reason he was struggling. I was the reason he survived his struggle." Ryan stepped forward, his hands raised like he was trying to calm down a situation that had already exploded. "This isn't helping anyone. Sarah, I know you're angry, but..." "I'm not angry, Ryan. I'm tired. I'm tired of being blamed for problems I didn't create. I'm tired of being treated like a villain in a story where I was actually the hero. And I'm especially tired of watching your mother rewrite history to make me responsible for every difficult thing that ever happened to you." I looked around at the faces staring back at me. Some looked embarrassed, others confused. A few seemed angry on my behalf. Patricia just looked stunned, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone," I said finally. "I came to return Ryan's stuff and leave quietly." But I wasn't going to stand there and listen to Patricia tell people I was the worst thing that ever happened to her son when I spent 2 years and $43,000 making sure nothing truly terrible happened to him. I walked over to the box by the front door and picked it up. Inside were some of Ryan's clothes, a few books, and the spare key to his apartment that I'd forgotten to return when we broke up. I handed it to him without ceremony. "Your recovery is your responsibility. Now," I told him, "I hope you stay clean. I hope you find someone who makes you happy. And I hope you eventually tell your parents the truth about how serious your addiction really was, because they deserve to understand what they almost lost." I turned to Patricia, who was still standing there looking shell-shocked. "And I hope you think twice before you decide someone isn't good enough for your family. Sometimes the people you dismiss are the ones holding everything together." I started walking toward my car, then stopped and turned back. "Oh, and Patricia, next time you want to tell people I was the worst thing that happened to Ryan, you might want to mention that I was also the best thing that happened to him. Because without me, he wouldn't be standing here in your perfect backyard complaining about his ex-girlfriend. He'd be in a hospital bed or worse, and you'd be planning a very different kind of family gathering." The drive home from Lake Oswego felt longer than usual. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, adrenaline still coursing through my system from the confrontation I'd never planned to have. Part of me felt vindicated finally, after months of watching Patricia paint me as some kind of relationship destroyer. But another part of me felt empty, like I'd just closed a chapter of my life that I'd been hoping might somehow reopen. My phone buzzed with text messages as I sat at red lights, but I didn't look at them. I could guess who they were from and what they said. Apologies, explanations, requests to talk. The same cycle we'd been through before, except now with the added complexity of his family knowing the truth about what I'd sacrificed. When I got back to my apartment in the Pearl District, the one Patricia had always made snide comments about, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I had work to do, freelance projects that would help me rebuild the savings account I'd emptied for a man who'd let his mother spend months destroying my reputation. But first, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I opened a new document and started writing down everything I could remember about the payments I'd made, the debts I'd covered, the conversations I'd had with Ryan's creditors. Not because I wanted the money back, but because I wanted a record. I wanted proof that the story Patricia had been telling about me was wrong. As I typed, I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Patricia made her comments. All the family dinners where I'd smiled politely while she questioned my choices, my background, my worthiness. All the moments when I could have defended myself, but chose to keep the peace instead. I thought about Ryan too, and how he'd sit quietly during those conversations, never stepping in to correct his mother's assumptions or defend the woman who was sacrificing everything to keep him safe. I'd told myself he was caught in the middle, that it was hard for him to stand up to his mother. But really, he'd been taking the easy way out, letting me absorb her disapproval while he stayed in everyone's good graces. The truth was, I deserved better than that. I deserved a partner who would stand up for me, who would tell his family the truth about our relationship instead of letting them create false narratives. I deserved someone who wouldn't let his mother call me poison while I was spending my life savings to protect him. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. It was a text from Ryan. "Can we talk? I want to explain." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "There's nothing to explain. Your mother made her feelings about me very clear, and you let her. That tells me everything I need to know." He texted back immediately. "That's not fair. You don't understand the position I was in." "I understand perfectly. You were in a position where you had to choose between defending the woman who loved you and keeping peace with the woman who raised you. You chose peace. It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple, Ryan. Every time your mother made a comment about my job or my apartment or my family, you had a choice. You could have said, "Actually, Mom, Sarah is working incredibly hard and I'm proud of her." You could have said, "Sarah has been nothing but supportive to me." You could have said, "I don't want to hear you talk about my girlfriend that way." But you didn't. You sat there quietly and let her tear me down. My phone was quiet for several minutes. Then, "You're right. I should have defended you. I was a coward." I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Yes, you were." Another long pause. Then, "Is there any chance we could try again? Now that everything's out in the open?" I looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd built for myself that Patricia had always looked down on. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd worked for every piece of furniture, every small comfort, every moment of independence. And I'd given up my financial security to protect a man who'd never valued what I was offering. "No," I typed back. "There isn't. Because of the money? Because of everything. Because you have a gambling addiction you're not taking seriously. Because you let your mother treat me terribly for 3 years. Because when I emptied my savings account to keep you safe, you never once acknowledged what I was sacrificing. Because you broke up with me instead of fighting for us. And because even today, even after I showed your family proof of what I did for you, your first instinct was to ask me to stop embarrassing you instead of thanking me." I put my phone down without waiting for a response and went back to my laptop. I had invoices to send out, client emails to answer, a financial future to rebuild. I had a life to live that didn't revolve around someone else's problems or someone else's family's approval. But as I worked, I kept thinking about Patricia's face when she saw those bank statements. The shock, the confusion, the dawning realization that she'd been completely wrong about me. For 3 years, she'd seen me as some kind of interloper, someone who didn't belong in her son's life or her family's world. She'd judged me based on my clothes and my job and my background, never bothering to look deeper, never considering that I might be exactly what Ryan needed. And maybe that was the real tragedy of the whole situation. Not just that I'd lost my savings or my relationship or my illusions about the Parker family, but that Patricia had lost the chance to know someone who genuinely cared about her son, someone who would have done anything to protect him, someone who could have been an ally instead of an enemy. I finished my work around midnight and was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed one more time. I expected it to be another message from Ryan, but it was from a number I didn't recognize. "This is David Parker. I got your number from Ryan. I wanted to apologize for tonight and for the way Patricia has treated you. We had no idea about any of this. Would it be possible to meet for coffee sometime this week? I think we owe you a proper thank you." I stared at the message for a long time. David had always been kinder than his wife, more willing to listen, less quick to judge. But he'd also stood by while Patricia made her comments, never intervening, never suggesting that maybe she was being unfair. Still, there was something in his message that felt genuine. An acknowledgement that they'd been wrong, that I deserved better treatment, that my sacrifices had mattered even if they'd gone unrecognized. I typed back, "Coffee would be fine, but I want to be clear that I'm not interested in getting back together with Ryan. That ship has sailed. I understand. This isn't about that. This is about us understanding what you did for our son and making sure you know we're grateful. Grateful enough to make sure Patricia stops telling people I was bad for Ryan? Grateful enough to make sure she understands the truth about what kind of person you really are." It wasn't everything I wanted to hear, but it was something. Maybe David would go home and have a difficult conversation with his wife about judgment and assumptions and the danger of deciding someone's worth based on superficial details. Maybe Patricia would think twice before dismissing the next woman Ryan brought home. Maybe they'd both learned something about looking deeper, about asking questions before drawing conclusions. Or maybe they'd just feel guilty for a while and then go back to their old patterns once the shock wore off. I couldn't control that. I could only control my own response, my own choices, my own future. I turned off my phone and got ready for bed. Tomorrow I'd meet with David if he followed through on his offer. I'd listen to whatever he wanted to say and decide whether his gratitude was genuine or just another attempt to manage a situation that had gotten uncomfortable. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I'd told my story honestly. I'd stood up for myself in a way I'd never been able to do before. I'd shown Patricia and her circle of friends exactly what I was made of, and I'd done it with bank statements and receipts instead of anger or accusations. It felt good to be done hiding. It felt good to stop protecting Ryan's reputation at the expense of my own. And it felt especially good to know that Patricia would never again be able to call me the worst thing that happened to her son without someone in that backyard remembering the truth about who I really was. The coffee shop David had chosen was neutral territory, a small independent place in the Alberta Arts District that I'd never been to before. I arrived 10 minutes early and claimed a corner table, positioning myself so I could see the entrance. Part of me wondered if this was some kind of setup, if Patricia would walk through the door instead of David, ready to launch into another attack now that she'd had time to process everything. But it was David who entered at exactly 3 o'clock, looking around until he spotted me. He was dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him, in jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his usual business attire. He looked older somehow, like the events of the weekend had aged him. "Sarah," he said as he approached my table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." I gestured to the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." He sat down and immediately started fidgeting with his hands. "Can I get you something? Another coffee? Something to eat?" "I'm fine," I said. "Let's just talk." David nodded and was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I want to start by apologizing, not just for Patricia's behavior at the barbecue, but for the last 3 years. We treated you badly, and there's no excuse for that." "There really isn't," I agreed. "When Ryan first told us about you, we made assumptions. Patricia, especially. She had ideas about who Ryan should end up with, what kind of woman would be right for our family. Those ideas were based on superficial things that don't actually matter." I watched his face as he spoke, trying to gauge his sincerity. "What kind of ideas?" David sighed. "Patricia grew up poor. Her father left when she was young, and her mother worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Patricia swore she'd never struggle like that again, and she worked incredibly hard to build the life we have now. But somewhere along the way, she started believing that financial security was the most important thing a person could have. So when Ryan brought home a girlfriend who rented an apartment and shopped at Target, she assumed I'd drag him down to my level? Something like that, yes. She saw your situation and projected her own fears onto it. She thought you'd make Ryan financially unstable, emotionally dependent. She never considered that you might be the kind of person who would sacrifice your own security for someone you loved." I stirred my coffee slowly, processing what he was telling me. "Did you feel the same way?" I thought Patricia was being harsh, but I didn't stop her. I told myself she'd come around once she got to know you better. That was cowardly of me. It was. David winced slightly at my bluntness, but he didn't argue. "I should have defended you. I should have told Patricia that her behavior was unacceptable. I should have made it clear that how much money someone makes doesn't determine their worth as a person." "Why didn't you?" "Because it was easier to let Patricia handle the social dynamics while I stayed out of it. Because I didn't want to deal with the conflict that would have come from challenging her. Because I took the path of least resistance, even when I knew it was wrong. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I appreciated his honesty, but I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with it. An apology couldn't undo 3 years of feeling unwelcome in their home. It couldn't give me back the confidence I'd lost from constantly being judged and found wanting. "How is Ryan doing?" I asked finally. "Not well," David admitted. "He's been staying with us since the breakup, and he's been struggling. The gambling addiction is worse than we realized. After you left on Saturday, he broke down and told us everything. The extent of his debt, the people he owed money to, how close he came to serious danger." "How close is close?" David's face darkened. "Close enough that we're grateful you intervened when you did. One of the men he owed money to, this Marcus Webb you mentioned, he came to our house yesterday looking for Ryan." My blood ran cold. "What did he want?" "Ryan had missed a payment. Apparently, the arrangement you'd made with these people was contingent on regular payments, and when Ryan couldn't cover what was due, they came looking for him." "How much did he owe?" $1,500. We paid it, obviously, but Marcus made it clear that this was a one-time courtesy. He said if Ryan falls behind again, there won't be any more warnings." I felt sick. After everything I'd sacrificed, after all the money I'd paid to these people, Ryan was still gambling. He was still creating new debts, even as I was paying off the old ones. "He's still betting?" David nodded grimly. "We found betting apps on his phone. Recent activity. He's been gambling online almost every day since you two broke up." "Does he know you paid Marcus?" "He knows. He also knows that we won't do it again. We've told him he needs to get serious about treatment or find somewhere else to live." I stared into my coffee cup, trying to process this information. All those months I'd been carefully managing Ryan's debts, making sure he stayed current with the dangerous creditors, believing that I was buying him time to get his addiction under control. But he'd never actually gotten it under control. He'd just gotten better at hiding it from me. The counseling sessions he told me he was attending? He went to a few in the beginning, then stopped. He's been lying about it for months. The Gamblers Anonymous meetings? He never went to a single one. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Everything I'd believed about Ryan's recovery, every sacrifice I'd justified by telling myself it was helping him get better, had been based on lies. I'd emptied my savings account for someone who had never intended to change. "Sarah," David said gently, "I know this is hard to hear, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. Ryan let you sacrifice everything for him while he continued the behavior that created the problem in the first place. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand that what happened between you and Ryan wasn't your fault. Patricia spent months blaming you for his problems, but the truth is, his problems existed long before he met you, and they continued long after you tried to help him solve them." I looked up at David, this man who had sat quietly through 3 years of family dinners while his wife made subtle digs about my worthiness. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to know that we understand now. What kind of person you are, what you were willing to do for our son, how badly we misjudged you, and I want you to know that Patricia understands too." "Does she?" David hesitated. "She's struggling with it. Learning that everything she believed about you was wrong. That's hard for someone like Patricia to accept. She built an entire narrative around you being bad for Ryan, and now she has to confront the fact that you were probably the best thing that ever happened to him." "Probably?" "Definitely. You were definitely the best thing that happened to him. You loved him enough to bankrupt yourself trying to save him. You researched treatment options. You drove him to appointments. You managed his finances when he couldn't. You did everything a person could do for someone with an addiction, but it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, Sarah. Ryan wasn't ready to be saved. That's not a reflection on you or your efforts. That's a reflection on him." I felt tears starting to form and blinked them back. I'd cried enough over Ryan Parker. I'd sacrificed enough, worried enough, tried enough. I wasn't going to give him any more of my emotional energy. Patricia wants to apologize to you personally, David continued. She's afraid you won't agree to see her, but she wants the chance to make things right. There is no making things right, I said. She spent 3 years treating me like I wasn't good enough for your family. She questioned my job, my lifestyle, my background, my character. She made me feel small and unwelcome in your home. An apology doesn't undo that damage. I know, but it might be a start. I studied David's face, looking for signs that this was some kind of manipulation, some attempt to manage the situation now that the truth was out. But he seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely concerned about the harm his family had done. What would Patricia's apology look like? I asked. I don't know. That would be up to her. But I think she needs to understand the full impact of her behavior, not just the financial sacrifice you made, but the emotional cost of being constantly judged and dismissed. And what about Ryan? David's expression grew sad. Ryan is going to have to figure out his own path. We've given him an ultimatum. Get serious about recovery or find somewhere else to live. We're not going to enable his addiction the way we enabled his dishonesty. You think he'll actually get help this time? I don't know. I hope so. But I've learned not to make assumptions about what Ryan will or won't do. He's lied to all of us for too long. We sat quietly for a few more minutes. I found myself thinking about the Ryan I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, the charming man in the coffee shop who'd spilled his drink on my work. That person had been real, but so had the addiction that was slowly destroying his life. I'd fallen in love with one version of him while trying desperately to save another version that maybe had never really existed. David, I said finally, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry at your family because you didn't recognize my financial sacrifices. I'm angry because you never bothered to see me as a person worth knowing. Patricia looked at my clothes and my apartment and decided I was beneath you. She never asked about my goals, my values, my character. She just made a judgment based on superficial things and stuck with it. You're right. If I'd been wealthy, if I'd come from the right kind of family, if I'd had the right kind of job, would she have treated me differently? David considered. This. Probably, yes. That's what makes this so hard to forgive. It's not just that she was wrong about me. It's that her entire value system is based on things that don't actually matter. She cares more about what someone looks like on paper than who they are as a human being. Patricia grew up with financial insecurity, and it shaped her perspective in some unhealthy ways. That's an explanation, not an excuse. No, it's not an excuse. And it's not an excuse for you either. You had the same information Patricia had, but you chose to see the situation differently. You could have spoken up. You could have defended me. You could have told your wife that her behavior was unacceptable. David nodded slowly. I failed you too. I know that. The thing is, David, I would have been a good addition to your family. Not because of my bank account or my pedigree, but because I genuinely cared about Ryan. I would have supported his goals, celebrated his successes, helped him through difficult times. I would have been the kind of daughter-in-law who remembered birthdays and asked about your health and included you in holiday plans. I believe that. But Patricia never gave me the chance to prove it. She decided I wasn't worthy before she even got to know me. David was quiet for a long time, staring into his untouched coffee. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy, with regret. Patricia has realized that she drove away someone who loved our son more than she understood was possible. Someone who sacrificed everything to protect him. Someone who would have been exactly the kind of woman we should have wanted. For Ryan, realizing it now doesn't change what happened. No, it doesn't. But maybe it changes what happens next. I looked at him curiously. What do you mean? Patricia has been calling Ryan's ex-girlfriends from before you. The ones she always said she preferred. She wanted to understand what made them so much better than you. And she discovered that none of them would have done what you did. None of them would have sacrificed their own financial security for Ryan. None of them loved him enough to put themselves at risk dealing with dangerous people. None of them researched treatment options or drove him to appointments or managed his finances when he couldn't do it himself. I felt a bitter satisfaction at this revelation. So she's finally comparing me to them based on something that actually matters. She's finally understanding that love isn't about matching someone's social status. It's about being willing to sacrifice for them, to fight for them, to stand by them when things get difficult. It took her 3 years and $43,000 of my money to figure that out? Yes. And she knows how ridiculous that is. I finished my coffee and checked the time on my phone. I had a client call in an hour, work that would help me rebuild the financial stability I'd given up for someone who had never deserved it. David, I appreciate you meeting with me. I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand that an apology doesn't fix this. Patricia's behavior toward me was consistent and deliberate. She had multiple opportunities to get to know me better, to see past her initial impressions, to recognize that I was good for Ryan. She chose not to take those opportunities. I understand. And even if she apologizes, even if she admits she was wrong, I'm not going to pretend that the last 3 years didn't happen. I'm not going to act like we can just start over and be one big happy family. No one expects that. Good. Because I've spent enough time trying to win over people who were determined not to like me. I've wasted enough energy trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I didn't have any. I stood up to leave, then paused. There's one more thing you should know. I don't regret paying Ryan's debts. I don't regret protecting him from dangerous people. I don't regret loving him enough to sacrifice my own financial security. What I regret is staying in a relationship where I was constantly made to feel like I wasn't good enough. Sarah, I regret not standing up for myself sooner. I regret letting Patricia's judgment affect how I saw myself. I regret allowing Ryan to sit quietly while his mother tore me down. Those are my regrets. Not the money, not the sacrifices, not the love I gave freely to someone who didn't value it properly. David nodded, understanding in his eyes. For what it's worth, I think you're an extraordinary person. The kind of person any family would be lucky to have. Thank you. But I'm not interested in being lucky enough for your family anymore. I'm interested in finding people who recognize my worth without me having to prove it first. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. If Patricia really wants to make amends, she can start by making sure she never treats another woman the way she treated me. She can examine her own values and figure out why she equates financial status with human worth. She can teach herself to look deeper, to ask better questions, to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'll tell her. And David, the next time you see someone being treated unfairly, don't take the path of least resistance. Speak up. Defend them. Do the right thing, even if it creates conflict. I left him sitting there with his untouched coffee and drove home through the Portland afternoon traffic. My phone buzzed with text as I navigated the streets, but I didn't look at them. I had work to do, a life to rebuild, a future to plan that didn't revolve around the Parker family's opinion of me. That evening, as I sat in my small apartment, working on client projects, I thought about the conversation with David. His apology had been genuine, but it hadn't healed the wounds his family had inflicted. You can't undo 3 years of being made to feel unwelcome with one conversation in a coffee shop. But something had shifted. For the first time since the barbecue confrontation, I felt like someone from Ryan's family truly understood what I had given up for him. Not just the money, but the emotional energy, the worry, the constant stress of managing someone else's addiction while being blamed for their problems. David had seen the bank statements, but more importantly, he had understood what they represented. They weren't just financial transactions. They were love letters written in dollar amounts, desperate attempts to save someone who hadn't wanted to be saved. I checked my phone before bed and found 3 text messages. One from David, thanking me for meeting with him and promising to relay my message to Patricia. One from Jessica, my best friend, asking how the coffee meeting had gone. And one from Ryan. My dad told me about your conversation today. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand now what I lost when I lost you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid and selfish to appreciate it. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Ryan was right that he didn't deserve forgiveness, at least not yet. But more than that, his message was still focused on what he had lost, not on what he had put me through. He understood that I was the best thing that had happened to him, but did he understand that he had been one of the worst things that had happened to me? Did he comprehend the damage his lies had done, the financial devastation his addiction had caused, the emotional toll of loving someone who couldn't love himself enough to get better? I didn't think he did, and until he could acknowledge the full scope of what his choices had cost me, until he could take responsibility for the harm he had caused instead of just lamenting what he had lost, I wasn't interested in hearing from him. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow I would continue the work of rebuilding my life, one client project at a time, $1 at a time, one day at a time. I would continue the process of learning to trust my own judgment again, of remembering that my worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. The Parker family's opinion of me had shaped too much of my life for too long. It was time to stop letting their voices drown out my own. 2 weeks after my coffee meeting with David, I was deep into a client presentation when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, focusing on the marketing strategy I was pitching to a local restaurant chain. The project was exactly the kind of work I loved, creative and challenging, and it paid well enough to make a real dent in rebuilding my savings. When I checked the voicemail later, I was surprised to hear Patricia's voice, shaky and uncertain, in a way I'd never heard before. Sarah, this is Patricia Parker. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I was hoping we could talk. David told me about your conversation, and I realize I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth about why I treated you the way I did, and I owe you a proper acknowledgement of what you did for Ryan. Could you please call me back when you have a chance? I stared at my phone for several minutes, debating whether to return the call. Part of me was curious about what Patricia might say, whether she was capable of real accountability, or if this was just another attempt to manage an embarrassing situation. Another part of me was tired of giving the Parker family emotional energy that could be better spent on my own healing and growth. But there was something in Patricia's voice that sounded different from the confident, judgmental woman I'd known for 3 years. She sounded humbled, maybe even a little afraid. After everything she'd put me through, I decided she deserved to squirm a little while waiting for my response. I waited 3 days before calling her back. Sarah, she answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sitting by the phone. Thank you for calling me back. I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't, because I needed to understand exactly what I'd rejected when I rejected you. I needed to see the complete picture of what you gave up for my son. She reached across the table and pointed to one of the documents. This payment here, to Marcus. Webb, that was $5,000, and according to the notes, you met him in person to deliver the cash. Yes. You put yourself in physical danger to protect Ryan. I wasn't going to let him get hurt because of money when I had the ability to prevent it. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents. This payment to Northwest Recovery Services, $12,000. That was your entire emergency fund, wasn't it? Yes. And this series of payments to Chase Bank, you were covering his minimum payments for 6 months straight. I was keeping his credit from being completely destroyed, while I was criticizing you for not being financially responsible enough for my family. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. While Patricia had been worried about my financial status, I'd been quietly managing and resolving her son's financial crisis with my own resources. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The woman I thought you were, based on my assumptions and prejudices, that woman never existed. The woman you actually are is someone I should have been honored to welcome into our family. But you didn't welcome me. You spent 3 years making me feel like I wasn't good enough. I know, and I can never undo that damage, but I can acknowledge it, and I can make sure you know that the problem was never with you. The problem was with me and my inability to see past my own fears. I closed the folder and looked at Patricia across the table. She looked genuinely remorseful, but remorse couldn't give me back the confidence I'd lost, or the money I'd spent, or the 3 years I'd wasted trying to win her approval. What do you want from me, Patricia? I want your forgiveness, but I know I don't deserve it. I want a chance to make things right, but I know that's probably impossible. Mostly, I want you to know that I understand now what kind of person you are, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. And what kind of person am I? You're the kind of person who puts love before money, who sacrifices for others without expecting recognition, who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult. You're the kind of person I should have been grateful to have in my son's life. Should have been, but you weren't. No, I wasn't. And because of that, Ryan lost the best thing that ever happened to him. We sat in silence for several minutes. I found myself thinking about the woman across from me, recognizing something in her story that I understood all too well. Patricia had been shaped by childhood trauma and financial insecurity, just as I'd been shaped by my own experiences. The difference was that she'd let her fears turn her into someone who judged others harshly, while I'd let mine turn me into someone who gave too much of myself away. Patricia, I appreciate your apology. I appreciate you taking the time to understand what I actually did for Ryan. But I need you to know that this doesn't fix everything. I know. Your treatment of me wasn't just about one misunderstanding or one bad first impression. It was consistent, deliberate, and cruel. You had multiple opportunities to get to know me better, and you chose not to take them. You're right. And even now, even with this apology, you're still focused on what Ryan lost instead of what I lost. You're sorry he doesn't have me in his life anymore, but are you sorry about what you put me through? Patricia considered this question seriously. Yes, I am sorry about what I put you through. I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome in our home. I'm sorry I questioned your worth as a person based on superficial things. I'm sorry I caused you pain and self-doubt. And I'm sorry I taught my son that it was acceptable to let someone treat the woman he loved badly. That last part is important. Ryan learned from watching you that he didn't need to defend me, that he could sit quietly while you tore me down, that my feelings were less important than keeping peace in the family. I know, and I'm ashamed of that. I took a sip of my drink and studied Patricia's face. She looked genuinely devastated by the conversation, genuinely remorseful about her behavior. But I'd learned not to mistake remorse for actual change. What are you going to do differently going forward? What do you mean? I mean, what have you learned from this experience? How are you going to make sure you don't treat the next woman in Ryan's life the way you treated me? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to try to see people for who they are instead of what they represent to me. I'm going to ask questions instead of making assumptions. I'm going to value character over financial status. And if Ryan brings home another girlfriend who doesn't meet your traditional standards, someone who works in retail or lives in an apartment or shops at discount stores, I'm going to remember that those things don't determine someone's worth as a person. Are you going to remember what I sacrificed for your son? I'm going to remember that love is measured by what someone is willing to give up, not by what they have to begin with. I nodded, satisfied with her answer. It wasn't everything I wanted to hear, but it was a start. Patricia, there's something I want you to understand about forgiveness. I can acknowledge your apology without forgiving you. I can appreciate your recognition of what I did for Ryan without welcoming you back into my life. I can accept that you've learned something from this experience without pretending that the damage you caused doesn't matter. I understand. Good. Because I'm not interested in pretending that we can be friends now. I'm not interested in having a relationship with your family. What I'm interested in is making sure you understand the impact of your choices so that you don't make the same mistakes with other people. I understand that too. We finished our drinks in relative silence. I know I don't deserve your time or attention after the way I've treated you. I was quiet, waiting to see where she would take the conversation. This was her show. Would you be willing to meet with me? I know it's asking a lot, but there are things I need to say to you that I should have said years ago. What kind of things? Patricia was quiet for a moment. The truth about why I never gave you a fair chance. The truth about my own insecurities and how they affected the way I saw you. And the truth about what I understand now about the kind of person you are. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing to meet her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a need for closure. Or maybe I just wanted to hear Patricia Parker admit she'd been wrong about everything. We arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant in downtown Portland, somewhere neutral where neither of us would have the home field advantage. Patricia was already seated when I arrived, looking smaller somehow than she had at the barbecue. She was dressed more simply than usual, in a plain black sweater and minimal jewelry. When she saw me approaching, she stood up quickly, her movements nervous and uncertain. Sarah, thank you so much for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I said, taking the seat across from her. We ordered drinks and sat in awkward silence for a few moments before Patricia spoke again. I don't know where to start. Start with why you hated me from the moment you met me. Patricia winced at my directness, but she didn't deflect. I didn't hate you. I was afraid of you. Afraid of me? That's ridiculous. I never did anything threatening. You weren't threatening in an obvious way, but you represented everything I was afraid Ryan would choose over the life I wanted him to have. I frowned. What does that mean? Patricia took a shaky breath. When I was growing up, my family was poor, really poor. My father left when I was 7, and my mother worked multiple jobs just to keep us fed and housed. I wore secondhand clothes to school. I qualified for free lunch. I lived in constant fear that we'd be evicted or that the electricity would be shut off. Okay. I swore I would never live like that again. I worked incredibly hard in school, got scholarships to college, met David, and built the life I always wanted. Financial security became the most important thing in the world to me. More important than happiness, more important than love, more important than anything. So when Ryan brought home a girlfriend who wasn't wealthy, you panicked. I saw you and I saw my mother, working hard but barely getting by, renting instead of owning, shopping at discount stores, always one crisis away from financial disaster. I was terrified that Ryan would choose love over security and end up struggling the way we did when I was a child. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the woman who had spent 3 years making me feel inadequate. So, you decided to drive me away before Ryan could make that choice. I convinced myself I was protecting him. I told myself that someone from your background couldn't possibly understand the importance of financial stability, that you'd be a burden on his future, without ever bothering to get to know me or understand what I was actually like. Patricia nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I made assumptions based on my own fears instead of facts. I saw what I expected to see instead of what was actually there. What was actually there, Patricia? She looked up at me, her carefully maintained composure starting to crack. A woman who loved my son more than I thought was possible. A woman who sacrificed everything to protect him. A woman who was stronger and more generous and more capable than I ever gave her credit for. I told you that you could learn those things about me if you'd bothered to ask. I know. I was so focused on protecting Ryan from what I thought. You represented that I never saw what you actually offered him. The server brought our drinks, giving us a moment to collect ourselves. Patricia wiped her eyes with her napkin and took a sip of her wine before continuing. David showed me the bank statements you brought to the barbecue. All of them. The $43,000 you spent keeping Ryan safe. Do you know what I did when I saw those numbers? I have no idea. I called Ryan's ex-girlfriend from college, the one I always said I preferred over you. I asked her if she would have done what you did if Ryan had been in trouble. And? She laughed. She actually laughed and said she would have run the other direction if she'd found out Ryan had gambling debts. She said she never would have stayed with someone who had that kind of problem, let alone spent her own money trying to fix it. I wasn't surprised by this revelation, but I was curious about Patricia's reaction to it. That's when I started calling other women Ryan had dated, women I'd thought were more suitable for him. None of them would have done what you did. None of them loved him enough to bankrupt themselves trying to save him. So you finally realized that financial compatibility isn't the same thing as love. I realized that I'd spent 3 years rejecting the one woman who actually proved she loved my son unconditionally. Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder similar to the one I'd brought to the barbecue. She slid it across the table to me. What's this? Open it. Inside the folder were copies of all the bank statements I'd shown them, along with additional documents I hadn't seen before. Payment records, receipts, transaction histories that went back further than my own records. How did you get these? I asked Ryan to provide every detail he could remember about the debts you paid. Then I contacted the creditors directly to get complete records. I wanted to understand the full scope of what you'd done. I flipped through the pages, seeing my financial sacrifice laid out in stark detail. The numbers were even more staggering when compiled together like this. Patricia, why did you do this? Before I left, Patricia handed me an envelope. What's this? It's not money, she said quickly. I know you wouldn't accept that. It's letters. From Ryan's other ex-girlfriends, the ones I contacted. I asked them to write down honestly what they would have done if they'd been in your situation. I opened the envelope and pulled out several handwritten notes. The first one was from Jennifer, the college girlfriend Patricia had always praised. Sarah, I don't know you, but I wanted you to know that what you did for Ryan was extraordinary. I dated him for 2 years, and I can honestly say I never would have sacrificed my financial security for him. Patricia asked me what I would have done if I'd found out about gambling debts, and the truth is, I would have ended the relationship immediately. I wouldn't have tried to help him or fix the problem. I would have protected myself first. What? You did shows a kind of love that's rare and valuable. I hope Ryan appreciated it, even if his family didn't. The other letters were similar. Women acknowledging that they wouldn't have done what I did, that they would have prioritized their own financial security over Ryan's safety, that they would have left rather than stay and fight for someone with an addiction. Why are you showing me these? Because I want you to know that I understand now what I rejected when I rejected you. I want you to know that I've compared you to everyone else Ryan has ever been with, and none of them measure up to you. It's too late for that to matter. Patricia, I know, but I wanted you to know anyway. I put the letters back in the envelope and stood to leave. Patricia stood too, reaching out as if she wanted to hug me, then thinking better of it. Sarah, is there anything I can do? Anything at all? I considered her question seriously. There is one thing. What? Stop telling people I was bad for Ryan. Stop rewriting history to make me the villain. If anyone asks about our relationship, tell them the truth. Tell them I loved your son enough to sacrifice everything for him, and that he lost me because he wasn't ready to be the man I deserved. I can do that. And one more thing. The next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your expectations, give them a chance. Ask questions instead of making judgments. Look for character instead of credentials. Be the kind of person who recognizes value in others instead of someone who dismisses people based on superficial things. I will. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. Patricia, I hope you find peace with this situation. I hope you learn to see people clearly. And I hope Ryan eventually gets the help he needs. But I won't be part of any of those journeys. I've given enough of myself to your family. I left her sitting in that restaurant and drove home through the Portland evening traffic. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica asking how the meeting had gone, but I didn't respond. I needed time to process what had happened, to decide how I felt about Patricia's apology and what it meant for my own healing. When I got home, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I had client work to finish, invoices to send, a business to grow. But first, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I logged into my online banking and looked at my savings account balance. $837. It was a number that had depressed me for months, a reminder of everything I'd given up for someone who hadn't deserved it. But tonight, for the first time, I saw it differently. That number represented the beginning of my new life, not the end of my old one. It was the foundation I'd build on, the starting point for a future that belonged entirely to me. I opened a new document and started writing. Not a business plan or a client proposal, but a list of goals for the next year. Financial goals, professional goals, personal goals. Things I wanted to achieve for myself, by myself, without regard for anyone else's approval or expectations. I wanted to rebuild my savings to $20,000 by the end of the year. I wanted to expand my freelance business into a small agency. I wanted to travel somewhere I'd never been before. I wanted to learn Spanish. I wanted to take a cooking class. I wanted to read 50 books. I wanted to run a half marathon. I wanted to remember who I was before I became consumed with fixing someone else's problems. I wanted to rediscover the woman who'd fallen in love with her own potential before she'd fallen in love with Ryan Parker. As I typed, I thought about the letters from Ryan's ex-girlfriends, all of them acknowledging that they wouldn't have done what I did. For 3 years, I'd seen my willingness to sacrifice as evidence of love. But maybe it was also evidence of something else. Maybe it was evidence that I'd lost sight of my own worth, that I'd confused enabling with caring, that I'd given away pieces of myself that should have been non-negotiable. The next time I fell in love, I would love differently. I would love someone who defended me instead of sitting quietly while others attacked me. I would love someone who appreciated my sacrifices without expecting them. I would love someone who saw my generosity as a gift instead of taking it for granted. But first, I would learn to love myself again. I would learn to value my own dreams as much as I'd valued Ryan's recovery. I would learn to protect my own future as fiercely as I'd protected his safety. I finished my list of goals and saved the document. Then I checked my email and found a message from a potential new client, a startup company looking for help with their marketing strategy. The project would pay well enough to make a real difference in my savings account. I responded immediately, setting up a meeting for the next day. This was how I would rebuild, one client at a time, $1 at a time, one day at a time. This was how I would prove to myself that my worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. 3 months later, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop in the Pearl District when Jessica burst through the door with exciting news. She'd just gotten engaged to her longtime boyfriend, and she wanted me to be her maid of honor. "Of course," I said, hugging her tightly. "I'm so happy for you." As we planned her engagement party, I realized something important. I was genuinely happy. Not the fake happiness I'd performed for 3 years while trying to win over the Parker family, but real, deep, uncomplicated joy for someone I loved. I'd been so focused on rebuilding my finances that I hadn't noticed my emotional healing. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't consumed with thoughts of what I'd lost or what I'd sacrificed. I was focused on what I was building, what I was becoming, where I was going. My savings account had grown to $15,000. My business was thriving. I'd signed a lease on a small office space downtown. I'd started taking salsa lessons and discovered I was actually pretty good at it. I'd read 37 books and planned a trip to Spain for the following summer. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment again. I'd remembered that my worth wasn't contingent on other people's approval, that my value wasn't determined by how much money I had in the bank, that my future wasn't limited by my past mistakes. That evening, as I was walking home from dinner with Jessica, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw a message from Ryan. "I heard about Jessica's engagement. I know you're probably her maid of honor. I wanted you to know that I'm finally getting real help. I've been in a residential treatment program for the last 2 months. I'm learning to understand my addiction and take responsibility for the damage I caused. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo, and I'm sorry. I hope you're happy." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. I hoped Ryan was getting the help he needed. I hoped he was finally taking his recovery seriously. I hoped he'd learn to tell the truth to the people who loved him. But his recovery was his responsibility now, not mine. His future was his to build, not mine to sacrifice for. His journey was his to walk, not mine to finance. I put my phone away and continued walking home through the Portland evening. The air was crisp and clean. The streets were busy with people heading to dinner and shows and dates. And I felt like I belonged in this life I was creating for myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to save anyone. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't trying to win over people who were determined not to like me. I was just being myself, building a life that made me proud, loving people who valued what I had to offer, and trusting that the right person would recognize my worth without me having to demonstrate it through sacrifice. It had taken $43,000 and 3 years of heartbreak to learn that lesson, but it was worth every penny and every tear. 6 months after my meeting with Patricia, I was standing in the lobby of a gleaming downtown office building, waiting for the elevator that would take me to the 30th floor. I adjusted my blazer and checked my reflection in the mirrored walls, hardly recognizing the confident woman staring back at me. Today was the day I'd been working toward for the better part of a year, the final presentation for the biggest contract my marketing agency had ever pursued. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, pressing the button for Mitchell & Associates Marketing. Yes, that's right. My name was on the door now. What had started as a desperate attempt to rebuild my finances after emptying my savings, for Ryan had evolved into something I'd never imagined possible. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving in ways that went far beyond financial recovery. The presentation went flawlessly. 3 executives from a major tech company sat around the conference table as I walked them through a comprehensive rebranding strategy that would position them for national expansion. My team of 4 freelancers had worked for weeks preparing the proposal and watching their faces light up as I explained our vision was better than any drug. "Ms. Mitchell," the CEO said as I concluded the presentation, "this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we've been looking for. When can you start?" The contract was worth more than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined. As I shook hands with each executive and watched them sign the agreement, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong, and everything to do with proving myself right. After they left, I stood alone in my conference room, looking out at the Portland skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. My reflection showed a woman who bore little resemblance to the broken person who'd confronted Patricia at that barbecue. This woman owned her own business, employed other people, made decisions that affected multiple families' livelihoods. This woman had rebuilt her life from $800 to a six-figure income in 18 months. But more importantly, this woman had learned to value herself correctly. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "How did the presentation go? Please tell me you crushed it so we can celebrate tonight." "Crushed it," I texted back. "Dinner at 7? Can't wait to hear everything." As I gathered my materials and prepared to leave the office, I thought about how different this celebration would be from the ones I might have had during my relationship with Ryan. Back then, every success was tempered by worry about his gambling. Every achievement overshadowed by concern about whether he was staying clean, whether the bills were paid, whether dangerous people were calling. Now my successes belonged entirely to me. There was no one else's crisis to manage, no one else's addiction to enable, no one else's family to win over. There was just me, building something meaningful with my own hands and my own vision. That evening, Jessica and I sat at our favorite restaurant in the Alberta district, the same neighborhood where I'd met with David for coffee all those months ago. But tonight felt like a different lifetime, a different version of myself entirely. "I still can't believe how much your life has changed," Jessica said, raising her wine glass in a toast. 2 years ago, you were crying in my kitchen because Patricia Parker made another snide comment about your apartment. Now you're running your own company and turning down dates because you're too busy being successful. "I'm not turning down all dates," I protested, laughing. "Just the ones with men who remind me of Ryan." "Meaning men who expect you to fix their problems? I'm meaning men who don't see my independence as an asset. I've learned to spot the red flags early now." Jessica grinned. "Like what?" "Like when someone assumes I'll be available whenever they want to see me without checking my schedule first. Like when they seem more interested in my financial stability than my personality. Like when they complain about their ex-girlfriends being too demanding for expecting basic respect. You've gotten very wise about dating." "I've gotten wise about a lot of things. Dating is just one of them." As we talked, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The truth was, losing Ryan and confronting his family had been the catalyst for changes I'd needed to make long before I met him. I'd been so focused on being the perfect girlfriend, the woman who never asked for too much and always gave too much, that I'd lost sight of my own potential. "Can I tell you something?" I said to Jessica as we finished our appetizers. "I'm grateful it all happened the way it did." "Grateful? For losing $43,000 and being treated like garbage by Patricia Parker? Grateful for learning who I really am when I'm not trying to save someone else. Grateful for discovering what I'm capable of when I put my energy into my own goals instead of someone else's problems. Grateful for understanding the difference between love and enabling." Jessica studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd known me for 15 years. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I really do. The woman who was with Ryan, who emptied her savings trying to fix his addiction while his mother called, her poison. That woman was kind and generous and loving, but she was also naive and codependent and afraid of her own power. And now? Now I know what I'm worth. I know what I bring to the table. I know that love doesn't require sacrifice of your own dreams and goals. I know that the right person will value what I offer without me having to prove it by giving up everything." Our entrees arrived, and we spent the next hour catching up on Jessica's wedding plans and my business expansion ideas. As the evening wound down, Jessica brought up something I'd been wondering if she would mention. "I saw Ryan last week," she said carefully, watching my reaction. "Oh?" "He was at the grocery store with someone, a woman I didn't recognize. They seemed close. I waited to feel something. Jealousy, regret, curiosity about who she was and whether she knew what she was getting into. But all I felt was a mild hope that he was treating her better than he'd treated me. Good for him, I said, meaning it. I hope he's learned how to be honest with her. That's it? You're not curious about who she is or how long they've been together? Not really. Ryan's relationships aren't my business anymore. His recovery isn't my responsibility anymore. His family's opinion of his girlfriends definitely isn't my concern anymore. Jessica smiled. You really have moved on, haven't you? Completely. And it feels amazing. As we walked to our cars after dinner, Jessica hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you, Sarah. Not just for the business success, but for how you've rebuilt yourself. You're stronger now than you were before any of this happened. Driving home through the Portland night, I thought about Jessica's observation. She was right. I was stronger now, but not in the way I'd been strong during my relationship with Ryan. Back then, my strength had been about endurance, about absorbing pain and stress without breaking, about managing crisis after crisis while maintaining a positive facade. Now my strength was about boundaries, about knowing my worth, about building something meaningful instead of just surviving something difficult. It was the difference between being strong because you have to be and being strong because you choose to be. When I got home to my new apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom place in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and huge windows, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down to review the contract I'd signed that morning. The numbers still seemed surreal. This single project would bring in more money than I'd ever seen at once, enough to fully fund my business expansion and still have a substantial emergency fund. But what struck me most wasn't the financial security, though that was certainly satisfying. What struck me was the realization that I'd built all of this without compromising who I was or what I believed in. I hadn't had to change my values or sacrifice my integrity or pretend to be someone I wasn't. I'd simply channeled all the energy I'd been pouring into Ryan's problems into my own potential instead. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The right. Caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about it looked familiar. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Sarah, this is David Parker. I hope I'm not calling too late. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10 o'clock, which was late for someone like David to be making social calls. Is everything okay? I asked. Yes, everything's fine. I wanted to tell you something and I didn't want to wait until tomorrow. What is it? David was quiet for a moment, and I could hear something like nervousness in his silence. Patricia and I ran into one of your former colleagues today, someone who works at the marketing firm you used to freelance for. She was telling us about your new company, about the success you've been having. Okay. Sarah, we had no idea how well you were doing. When Patricia heard about your business, about the clients you're working with, she started crying right there in the middle of the conversation. I wasn't sure how to respond to this information. I'm sorry that upset her. She wasn't upset. She was proud and ashamed, but mostly proud. She kept saying, "That's the woman I thought wasn't good. Enough for our family. That's the woman I thought would hold Ryan back." David, I appreciate you calling, but I'm not sure what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I just wanted you to know that we see now what we missed then. We see the woman we could have had in our family if we'd been smart. Enough to recognize your worth. It's too late for that to matter. I know. But Patricia wanted you to know anyway. She said she keeps thinking about all the family dinners where she made comments about your job or your apartment, and now she realizes she was criticizing someone who was already more successful than she. Understood. I took a sip of wine and looked around my beautiful apartment, at the life I'd built entirely on my own terms. David, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Patricia would have treated me differently if she'd known? I was going to be successful? If she'd somehow been able to see that I'd end up running my own company and making good money? David was quiet for a long time. Probably, yes. That's exactly why I don't want her apologies or her pride now. Her respect was always conditional on external markers of success. She didn't value me as a person when she thought I was just a struggling freelancer, and I don't want her approval now that I'm financially successful. I understand. The kind of love and respect I want isn't based on what someone achieves or how much money they make. It's based on character, on kindness, on the content of their heart. That's the kind of love I gave Ryan, and it's the kind of love I deserve in return. You're absolutely right. If Patricia had valued those qualities from the beginning, she would have seen that I was exactly the kind of woman you should want in your family, but she couldn't see past the surface-level indicators of worth. You're right about that, too. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. David, I hope you and Patricia learn from this experience. I hope you become the kind of people who see others clearly from the beginning, not just after they've proven themselves according to your standards. We're trying to do better. Good. Because somewhere out there is another woman who deserves to be valued for who she is, not what she has. And maybe if you've learned your lesson with me, you'll give her the chance I never got. After I hung up with David, I sat down at my laptop and did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I opened a new document and started writing about my experience. Not for any particular purpose, but just to get the story out of my system once and for all. I wrote about falling in love with Ryan, about discovering his gambling addiction, about the slow erosion of my savings account as I tried to save someone who didn't want to be saved. I wrote about Patricia's judgment and David's cowardice and Ryan's willingness to let me absorb his family's disapproval while he stayed silent. But I also wrote about what I'd learned about myself, about the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in their problems, about the importance of being with people who defend you instead of people who let others attack you, about the power of channeling your energy into your own growth instead of someone else's recovery. As I wrote, I realized that my story wasn't really about Ryan or his family at all. It was about discovering my own worth, learning to trust my own judgment, and building a life that reflected my values instead of other people's expectations. The woman who had stood in Patricia's backyard with bank statements in her hand, demanding recognition for her sacrifices. That woman had been strong, but she'd still been focused on getting other people to see her value. The woman writing this story, sitting in her own apartment after closing the biggest deal of her career, she didn't need anyone else's recognition. She knew her own worth, and that knowledge was unshakable. 3 weeks later, I was in my office, reviewing resumes for a new account manager position when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says it's personal. A Ryan Parker?" My first instinct was to say I wasn't available, to avoid a conversation I wasn't sure I wanted to have, but curiosity won out. "Send him in." Ryan walked into my office looking nervous and uncertain, clearly intimidated by the professional space I'd created. He was thinner than I remembered, and there was something different about his demeanor. He seemed more serious, less charming, like someone who'd been forced to confront difficult truths about himself. "Sarah," he said, standing awkwardly near the door. "Thank you for seeing me." "What can I do for you, Ryan?" He looked around the office, taking in the framed business licenses, the photos of my team, the evidence of everything I'd built since our relationship ended. "I wanted to apologize, in person, for everything." "Okay. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. I know I let my family treat you terribly while you were sacrificing everything to help me. I know I was selfish and dishonest and completely unworthy of what you gave me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit down, Ryan." He sat, his hands clasped nervously in his lap. "I've been in treatment for 8 months now. Real treatment. Not the pretend counseling I told you I was doing before. I'm finally understanding how my addiction affected everyone around me, especially you. I'm glad you're getting help. I want you to know that I understand now what I lost when I lost you. Not just because you paid my debts, but because you loved me better than I loved myself. You saw potential in me that I couldn't see, and you were willing to sacrifice your own future to help me realize it. Yes, I was. I also understand that I can never make up for what I cost you. Not just the money, but the years of your life, the stress, the way my family treated you. I understand that saying sorry doesn't fix any of that. As I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had characterized so much of our relationship, but he seemed genuinely different, more grounded somehow. What do you want from me, Ryan? Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I lost, and I wanted to take full responsibility for my role in destroying something beautiful. And what was your role? I let my addiction control my life instead of fighting for recovery. I lied to you about my progress while you were risking everything to keep me safe. I let my mother treat you badly because it was easier than standing up to her. I took your love for granted because I was too selfish to recognize how rare it was. I was quiet for a moment, processing his words. This level of accountability was something I'd never heard from Ryan before. I'm glad you're taking responsibility, I said finally. That's important for your recovery. I know you've moved on. I know you're building an amazing life without me. I'm not here to ask for another chance or to try to win you back. I just wanted you to know that I see clearly now what I couldn't see then, which is that you were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too broken to deserve you. I looked at this man who had once been the center of my world, who I'd loved enough to empty my savings account for, who I'd fought to save even when he wouldn't fight to save himself. I felt nothing but a distant sadness for the time we'd both lost. Ryan, I want you to know something. What I did for you, the money I spent, the risks I took, I don't regret any of it. I would do it again for someone I loved if they were genuinely committed to getting better. I know, but I wouldn't do it again for someone who was lying to me about their recovery. I wouldn't sacrifice my own future for someone who wouldn't defend me to their family. I wouldn't stay with someone who let me absorb their problems while taking credit for their successes. I understand. I hope you find someone who makes you want to be the man I believed you could become. I hope you learn to be honest with her from the beginning. And I hope you never let anyone treat her the way your family treated me. Ryan nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I hope I become worthy of that kind of love someday. You can be, if you choose to be. But that's work you have to do for yourself, not for anyone else. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Sarah, can I ask you one question? What? Are you happy? Really happy? I looked around my office, thought about the team I'd built, the clients who trusted me, the life I'd created entirely, on my own terms. I thought about the apartment I loved, the friends who valued me, the future I was building one decision at a time. Yes, I said. I'm really happy. Good. You deserve to be. After Ryan left, I sat in my office for a long time, reflecting on how much both of us had changed. The man who'd just apologized to me bore little resemblance to the selfish, dishonest person I'd broken up with 2 years earlier. And the woman who'd accepted his apology with grace and boundaries bore little resemblance to the people-pleasing, self-sacrificing person I'd been during our relationship. We'd both grown, but in different directions. He'd learned to take responsibility for his actions and acknowledge the harm he'd caused. I'd learned to value myself correctly and build a life that reflected my worth. That evening, I met Jessica for our weekly dinner at a new restaurant in the Pearl District. As we caught up on the events of the week, I told her about Ryan's visit. "How did it feel to see him?" she asked. "Like seeing someone I used to know. A long time ago." There was no anger, no sadness, no regret. Just recognition of how much we've both changed. "Do you think he's really different now?" "I think he's learned some important lessons about himself and his addiction. But whether that translates into lasting change, I have no idea. And it's not my job to find out." Jessica smiled. "You really have come full circle, haven't you?" "What do you mean?" 2 years ago, you would have felt responsible for monitoring his progress, for making sure he stayed on track, for being available if he needed support. Now you're just done in the healthiest possible way." She was right. The closure I'd felt after Ryan's visit wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation or any grand gesture of letting go. It was about recognizing that his journey was his to take, his recovery was his to maintain, and his future was his to build. My job was to focus on my own journey, my own growth, my own future. And that future was brighter than anything I could have imagined when I was emptying my savings account to pay someone else's debts. 6 months later, I was standing in the conference room of my expanded office space, looking out at a team of 12 employees who had just finished presenting our quarterly results to a room full of potential investors. My marketing agency had grown beyond anything I'd dreamed possible, and we were on the verge of opening a second location in Seattle. But the real victory wasn't the financial success or the business growth. The real victory was the woman I'd become in the process of building all of this. Someone who knew her worth, who set healthy boundaries, who loved generously, but never at the expense of her own well-being. That night, I went home to my beautiful apartment and opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate another successful quarter. As I sat on my couch, looking out at the Portland skyline, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Losing $43,000 to pay Ryan's gambling debts had been devastating at the time. But it had also been the catalyst for changes I'd needed to make in my life. Changes I might never have made if I hadn't been forced to rebuild from almost nothing. I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by my bank account balance or other people's approval. I'd learned that love without respect was just enabling. I'd learned that the right person would value what I offered without me having to prove it through sacrifice. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was capable of creating a life I was proud of, entirely on my own terms. My phone buzzed with a text from a man I'd been dating for the past few months. Someone who appreciated my independence instead of feeling threatened by it, who celebrated my successes instead of competing with them, who defended me when others questioned my choices. "Congratulations on the quarterly results. Can't wait to hear all about it over dinner tomorrow. You're amazing." I smiled as I read his message, appreciating the support, but not needing it to feel complete. This was what healthy love looked like. Not desperate codependency or enabling sacrifice, but two whole people choosing to build something together while maintaining their individual identities. I raised my champagne glass in a toast to the woman I'd become, to the lessons I'd learned, and to the future I was creating one choice at a time. The past had taught me what I was capable of surviving. The present was teaching me what I was capable of building. And the future? The future was entirely mine to write. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.